Historic Preservation Officer for the state of Nevada, Mr. James.
Thank you all. Brian asked me, Brian will be the second act, and he'll be the act that you're probably more interested in. Brian set this up so that I would give you a presentation you wouldn't be interested in, so that when his presentation came along, you'd be very interested. Brian asked me to speak about the Comstock before the railroad, which is exactly what you're not interested in. Nevertheless, it does help to put a context in the effect of the railroad on the Comstock. Everyone knows the Comstock, and most of what is popularly known about the Comstock is actually the period of the railroad. Because whether you're looking at Lord or Wright or Shin or even Grant Smith, they have the obligatory, this is how it was discovered, this is what the 1860s were like, and then here comes the big bonanza, which coincidentally is the time of the railroad. So most of what they really drill down on is the period of the 1870s. When I started researching on the Comstock, I found that the easy part. Understanding the early 60s, the pre-railroad Comstock, was the most difficult part. Ironically, as some of you might recognize this map, it's not usually presented as an accurate historical document, but in this context, it's kind of interesting. As you, I'm sure, know, Bonanza, the television series, debuted in 1959 as part of the national celebration, which included a postal stamp at a time when it was really hard to get a postal stamp. Now, any of you can get a postal stamp, or if you have a good sneeze, they'll give you a postal stamp. But in 1959, it was more difficult, and NBC, to showcase its new color program, showcased the Cartwrights running, charging across the field up in the meadows up near Mount Rose, and of course this map, which was immediately set on fire, because that's what happens in the real Wild West. If you look at this map, this is pre-railroad, with the one exception. What's the one exception here that post-railroad? Reno, exactly. That Reno wasn't Reno until the railroad, but they had to put that there because everyone knew Reno. So you know, that's television license. But there are no railroads here. And actually, if you look, and I have tried to look at some episodes that I find them excruciating. If you like it, that's very good. I really have a hard time making way through the whole episode. But that first year was a real homage to the first year of the Comstock, and they did as well as television could possibly do in 1959. They went to Dan DeQuille, which was not quite as good as going to Elliott Lord, but it was a lot more entertaining. And so the history wasn't great, but that first year was a homage to the first year after the strike, 100 years before, and it was pre-railroad. So one of the things you notice here is that no railroad, but in fact roads. And that was one of the problems that the Comstock had to tackle, was how to build an infrastructure in a remote outpost, far removed from all reasonable supplies, living on a hillside that no one would pick as home for any reason other than gold and silver. And then how do you develop that? And the infrastructure, as well as the mining technology that they developed to tackle this place in the 1860s, that was then exported throughout the world. So that this was how you did it. This was how you put it together. The ultimate how to do it, of course, was finalized in the last year of the decade, when they said, you know, it's even better than really good roads for Teamsters, and these roads had to be roads that weren't just simple wagon paths. They had to be good roads where you could have vehicles pass one another in opposite directions. Really state-of-the-art roads. But then at the last year of the decade, of course, they put the railroad in, which was the ultimate how to develop a remote western outpost. So let's get off this, but I'm going to need a clicker, or it just won't work. So here's a history that you're more comfortable with, and of course this is 100 years earlier than that map, which is the first strike, there's a mining claim not necessarily from June of 1859, but a few months later. That's the Ophir claim to the Ophir diggings, and this is the famous lithograph depicting Henry Comstock talking his way into the mining claim that the two Irish miners had just discovered at the Ophir. This wasn't the first strike, this was actually the second strike. The first strike was at Gold Hill in January of 1859. This is June of 1859, the Ophir strike that would establish Virginia City. And of course, it was 3 weeks later after this that they assayed the ore and found out that they weren't just dealing with gold, but also an incredible amount of silver that ultimately equaled in value the gold that was extracted. We're known as the Silver State, as you know, but that's only because some other state took the title of Golden State. But the Comstock produced in wealth just as much gold as it did in silver. And because there was a historic ratio of about 10 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold, and 10 ounces of silver when it was pegged at 1/10 the value of gold, $1.60 to $16 an ounce for gold, meant that if you had 10 ounces of silver, it was equal to the 1 ounce of gold. So the monetary value was about 50-50. And today, Comstock Mining, which is mining up on the Comstock, is still producing bullion at a ratio of about 10-1. The value of silver is no longer pegged at a ratio of 1/10 the value of an ounce of gold. So their bullion is largely valued in gold, but the quantity is still 10-1. And once that assay, word of that assay came forward, there was the rush to Washoe, as they called this region in its early days. And this, of course, was western Utah territory, with the understanding that everyone basically ignored Utah government, but and did what they felt like, and very quickly established the Comstock mining district with its set of laws and to regulate how they would deal with issues of claims and counterclaims and other mining topics within the mining district. The rush to Washoe quickly became international, just like the rush to the California gold rush was. The world rushed into California, and then after they rushed in there, they rushed into the Western Great Basin. And although the first wave was heavily American, that is, they were from the east, from the states, as they would say, from the eastern states, the population increasingly became international until by 1870, the time of the premiere of the railroad, Nevada had more foreign-born per capita than any state in the nation. You think of the great immigration ports of Boston and New York and even Chicago, and in spite of the heavy immigration that those communities were experiencing, Nevada had more foreign-born per capita than any other state in the nation. And it was very quickly documented by visitors. The tourism industry was alive and well in that first season, and then throughout the period of the Comstock. It was one of the wonders of the world. The technology that was being developed on the Comstock to be able to go over a half-mile underground in a single elevator drop in a world where elevators were a rarity, all of that, and then processing and doing everything made the Comstock the 19th century equivalent of going to the moon. And so tourists came here, and they came here almost immediately. J. Ross Brown was a fairly important author, illustrator for Harper's. An earlier work of his on, he was part of a whaler ship that was had a mutiny in the Indian Ocean, and that became the inspiration of Melville and his big whale. Moby Dick, and so this guy was really something, and he appeared on the Comstock in March of 1860, as soon as the winter snows let up and he could cross over. And his depiction of Virginia City is one of the first. not the first, but really one of the most, one of the first credible images of it. And so J. Ross Brown, although he would disparage the Comstock and complained about the water, which had made him sick and caused him to leave, gives us a lot of very nice early images of the Comstock. They are directed to an Eastern audience that wanted to think of the Wild West as indeed wild, and so the image to the far left is, you can't read this, but it says "Home for the Boys." So this is their home, which is a saloon where they're trying to kill one another. And what could be more homey than that in the Wild West? So you see they're shooting, using bottles to break over one another's head. And in other words, anticipating the Cartwrights. One of those is certainly Little Joe. He was always getting in trouble. And then the flowery diggings down the hill from Virginia City and Gold Hill, and throughout this, he repeatedly had a great deal of saloons, because that we always want to think of the West as loaded with saloons, and every Western community said, we drink harder than every other Western community, and so it was a matter of bragging rights to have as many saloons as possible. And here are two more images. This is from his second visit in 1862. He depicts a street in Virginia City, that in this case it is C Street, full of traffic jams, and wagons that have tipped over, and there's a fight going on the far left. You can't really see it very well, but if you really look at it closely, they're fighting one another, and a little dog wants to get involved. And then if you look, we're able to read the names that are on these businesses. They're all saloons. Every single one of those is saloons. And we know that not to be true, but that's the Wild West image that J. Ross Brown wanted to communicate. And then on the left are the ladies of the hotel. That is that there's a hotel, and obviously the ladies are part of the benefits of living in that hotel. And if you look at them, there's a way to do this. Let's see. Oh, that didn't work. I did something terrible. I did. I pushed this. Can I push it again?
Try it. Yeah, try it.
There we go. I pushed the wrong thing. So if you look closely at these women, they have pug noses and round faces, which was the cliched stereotype of an Irish immigrant. And we all know that Irish women, they were here and then they became prostitutes. So you see, he has his arm around them, and they're obviously up to no good. And they there's too much smiling going on there with the guys. So we know what all that means. So they're the ladies of the hotel. And again, he's trying to communicate violence and heavy drinking and illicit sex. The kind of things that would keep you awake if this were the fourth presentation in the day, but maybe it'll wake you up in the morning. More accurate depictions, another Brown, but without the E. Grafton Brown was an African-American artist who also, like his compatriot J. Ross Brown, but Grafton Brown came to the Comstock also twice and drew pictures of the Comstock, but they were much more accurate. So you may be familiar with this, although this is not your period, so you don't care about that. Thank you, Brian, for setting me up to not be entertaining. But this is a very early depiction of the Comstock, late 1860, published in 61, and with businesses around the border and nice depictions of the Main Street. Some saloons, but not dominated by saloons, because there was a community. It had to offer more than just saloons. So very complex. And here, you may be familiar with Taylor Street. This is Taylor's business, which was right on the southwest corner of C and Taylor, which is now where the Bank of California building is, or you may know it by the Sharon House, that structure. This is the original building, 1859, probably, maybe early 1860. a masonry structure, very impressive for this early boom town. And it was a grocery store. They sold liquor too, but it wasn't a bar. Groceries, provisions, liquor, etc. by Thomas Taylor, who gave his name to Taylor Street, which is still there. And then if you look at this detail of the community, one of the things you'll notice here, this is B Street, and this is C Street, you know, the main drag of Virginia City, but where's all the traffic? It's all on B, because that was the commercial corridor. The community started uphill, and all the hoist works were up in the region of A Street, where you still see the Ophir Pit. If you go up Sutton, you'll run into the Ophir Pit. It's way up there, because the ore was erupting around in the neighborhood of A Street, and as it sprawled uphill, they had to come up with new names. So above A Street, or it's Howard and Stewart, and because they ran out, they were on the wrong end of the alphabet. It was sprawling uphill, and that's where the major hoist works were, all along there. The community slipped down as that ore body was developed. First with open pit mining, which started in 1859, then with underground mining, with hoist works on A Street, and then it slipped down as they were chasing the ore downhill until the second generation of hoist works in the mid to late 60s was along B Street, and then finally way down the hill where you see the great combination shaft across the valley that still is so huge and omnipresent on the Flowery Hill digs that you can see across the valley. I'm assuming you all know what I'm talking about. And that was the third generation of hoisting. But originally, B Street was the commercial corridor. A fire in mid-1860 swept through B Street, destroying many of the structures. And while they were rebuilding, as the community was slipping, kind of sagging with age, C Street recaptured the role of major commercial corridor, which it retains to this day. So if you walk along B Street, you don't see it, but you see remnants of it with the business block that later became the front of Piper's Opera House. It's a Piper's business block on that very important corner of B and Union Street, where the back of the International was there. There was an important groceries, the Fulton Market was there, the corner bar and the Piper business block. That was the hub, was B and Union Street. But by the time that was opened and after the 1863 fire, C Street was really on the move, and it never looked back. So this is a place that demanded attention. Mining booms are notorious for booming and what follows boom but bust. What follows bonanza, the term we all know, but what's the opposite of bonanza? Thank you. For some reason, it's not as well known as bonanza. I think it's because ABC should have picked up a television series called Borrasca, portrait of a mining community in decline. But somehow it just never picked up. That would have been a great idea. But you would expect mining booms to naturally go from boom to bust, from bonanza to Borrasca. But it was a roller coaster ride, and we can't think of it purely as 20 years of bonanza, but it was surprisingly filled with bonanza. There were slumps, and in 1863, late 1863, the economy began to slide a little bit. The owners of the International decided to pack up the International Hotel and move it to the next best place, which was Austin. And that's if you want to drink at the International Hotel, it's the only place you can do it. There were 3 or 4 internationals, depending on how you count the various incarnations at the northwest corner of C and Union, and then also backing on B and Union, that occupying that whole block, which is now a parking lot where you can get Rocky Mountain oysters in March, so you want to come back and enjoy that seafood delicacy. But that's where the International was, of course, and Two of the incarnations burned, but the first one, or the second one really, because it was modified so severely, you have to call it the second one, was moved to Austin. And so if you want to drink at the Austin bar, at the Austin Hotel, you have to go to, the International Hotel and the International Bar, you have to go to Austin, the only survivor. So there was some, in 1863, they said, oh, Virginia City's doing what all mining camps do. It blooms, it booms, and then it goes bust. But the roller coaster ride never hit bottom, it came back up, and did it a couple of times throughout that 20-year period. But what was remarkable was that it never gave up. The output was incredible. And if we go out today, and we should do that because it'd be a lot more profitable than sitting here and listening to people like me, go out and look for gold and silver. If we actually find some, you can expect it to make us a little bit of money, but they usually pinch out. But the Comstock kept on growing and growing. And as it grew, in this new industrial technological environment, they invented the technology to tackle it. And it became world famous for its wealth and for the technology it was producing. So that if you go through the mining and engineering journals of the 1860s and 1870s and even into the 1880s, almost every issue has an article on what was happening up on the Comstock. It was that famous, and people were watching it. What are they going to invent next? What are they going to test next? Because if they didn't test it, they were the first place for it to be. If they didn't invent it, it was the first place where they tested it. Grass Valley, they tried to convince the miners there to use dynamite, and they refused. The miners' union there, or the miners, it wasn't unionized, the miners blocked it and said, no, we won't use dynamite. We prefer the safer liquid nitroglycerin. Good call. That's why they looked at the Comstock, because here they tested sticks of dynamite and proved it to be safe. It was the place that invented square set timbering. It invented the Washoe pan process, which was a new way to mill the ore. It invented the safety cage and reinvented the safety cage several times so that the cages that were used to go up and down the shafts became safer and safer with each generation and each modification. It was the place where they invented and first tested the flat wire cable, because round wire cable kinked and often snapped. The flat wire cable was better for the hoisting works. It was the first place, they didn't invent it, but it was the first place for major testing of air compressed drills. And it just keeps on going every time. And then, of course, the B&T, which I won't talk about because that would be too interesting, was a technological achievement in itself. A survey, I mean, just laying out the right-of-way, as you know, was a surveying achievement. And the Crown Point Trestle, I won't talk about it, was one of the wonders of the world. It became a tourist attraction in itself. So while the Comstock was attracting tourists as well as people who wanted to see if they could make a lot of money here, in the 1860s, it only became more important as the B&T arrived, because it made it more accessible to tourists, and riding the B&T was such a thrilling experience that you had to do it, as we all know, and we don't want to do it even today. So here are a few portraits of early Virginia City. This is arguably the first photograph, July 4th, 1862. And it's of a volunteer fire company. And then these are part of the Sullivan set of photographs, which are on the Library of Congress webpage, dating to 1866. So these are very early portraits of the community. And you can see here how tightly packed everything is here. Public school, a lumber yard, and a lot of houses all packed in there. And of course, the ubiquitous Teamster, who is everywhere, because the only way to get anything from here to there was with a Teamster, because there were no railroads, because that would be too interesting if I were to actually talk to you about railroads. In the midst of this, we can't ignore the fact that this was this land belonged to somebody else before the Comstockers arrived. The Native Americans were here. They were scattered and few in number, which means we didn't have the kind of classic Indian wars that you had on the Great Plains, where you had a lot larger population, and the Native Americans were able to hold their own for a number of years. Instead, here we had one huge conflict between Native Americans and the white population, the Euro-Americans who had arrived. And although the Native Americans were able to trounce the newcomers, and it's something that we often overlook, that it was some 76 or so fallen in the volunteers who decided to go north to Pyramid Lake to teach the Northern Paiutes a lesson, and then ran. A few of them actually made it back to Virginia City, running as quickly as they can. 76 or so casualties among their numbers. That was the highest number of fatalities in any conflict between Native Americans and Euro-Americans in the United States or its territories since the 1790s. It was big news that to have that many killed. It gets eclipsed the following decade by this thing that happened with Little Bighorn, because that was far more. But this was huge to lose that many people. That hadn't happened in the United States since the 1790s. But they were there, they got assimilated, they were decimated by disease, of course, because they didn't have resistance to a lot of diseases that white children had been dealing with for centuries. But they came back and they established themselves pretty healthily in a lot of ways on the Comstock and integrated themselves into that society. Not the least of which, of course, is Sarah Winnemucca, who is now memorialized with the second statue in Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol, the first Native American woman to write and publish a book, and a real advocate, testified before Congress on Native American rights. Very important, and an important fixture of Comstock society, because the Winnemuccas were always advocates of assimilation as opposed to conflict. And to this day, descendants of the Winnemucca clan are regarded as, as the people who were willing to work with white people, and the traditionalists up at Pyramid Lake. And there's still a dispute among those groups as to how they fit into their own history. Also, very early on, but augmented in a huge way by the Chinese as they arrived after the Transcontinental Railroad project was complete. But even before that, there was a sizable Chinese-American population. They referred to Nevada as Yin Shan, which is depicted here. That's to make it distinct from Gumsan, which means Golden Mountain, and Yin Shan is Silver Mountain. Here, I'll show you how this works. This is the character for mountain. You can see it's kind of a mountain. See? You're going to get a free lesson in Chinese here. And then here's the character for gold. So just this character and this character, this would be Gum Shan or San in Cantonese. And then this is a modifier, this thing that looks like an R. So this means gold, but not really. And so that's how they modify the character for gold to mean almost gold, not quite. And so that's silver. So that becomes Silver Mountain. And that's what they called Nevada by virtue of the Comstock, Yin Shan. And a very sizable population, really helped build the Comstock, and obviously augmented by the flood of Chinese who were released from work on the railroad and were looking for other opportunities, not the least of which, a very famous story, which I don't need to go into because I know you know it better than I do, of working for the V&T, laying track and working up their way, and then having the miners union confront them and say, no, we're taking it over from here. Largely because the Comstock was dipping in value in 1869. The railroad saved the Comstock during a period of minor borrasca, minor dip, and actually made it profitable so that it could sustain itself until it finally reached the period of the big bonanza in 1873. So, also looking at this early society, it had women. Here are some hurdy-gurdy girls. Who were the first women on the mining frontier? Oh, thank you. That's not true. We had, this state was the only state in the nation to have the online census database, which was part of my website when I was State Historic Preservation Officer. Until a few weeks, it was taken down. And we're shopping around for a home for it because that database is extremely valuable. If you go to Ancestry.com, you can look up your relatives. You can do a lot with Ancestry.com, but with our database, it was fully searchable so that you could look at all the Irish widows who were involved in the laundry industry and find them. And you could look at all the railroad workers in 1870 and all the railroad workers in 1880. You could compare the number of Teamsters in 1870 and see how it was, their ranks were decimated by 1880. The percentage of Teamsters in the society drops dramatically, but I'm not going to talk about that because that's romancing. But that you could do that work with the census online by looking at occupations and gender and age groups and all sorts of things. I used to have 7th graders look at their age group and call up all the 13-year-olds and take a look at where they came from, where their parents came from, where their neighbors came from, because you could look at the whole block. But that database is no longer available. We were the only state in the nation that had that at its disposal, thanks to the legislature, which had given me about $85,000 to do it. They wanted it done, and we put it online, but it's been taken down, and now we're shopping for a home for it.
How come it was taken down?
It was, they were gonna have to pay somebody to redo it for the new system, number one. And number two, they were approached by somebody who wanted the entire database and demanded it in Freedom of Information Act, and because they wanted to sell it. And so they just said, oh, it's enough, we're taking it down. And they don't regard it as their mandate. It was not the mandate of the State Historic Preservation Office, but when Senators Rawson and Coughlin came to me and said, we're gonna give you an offer you can't refuse, and 2 senators on Senate Finance give you an offer that you can't refuse and includes the money to do it, you generally say, yes, sirs, that's not my job. So you say yes, and then they give you more money, so that's how it works, but so we took it down. It's tragic. Anyway, here are women for your imagination. And then this is J. Ross Brown telling the East Coast that the first women on the Comstock, as in any mining town, were prostitutes. But if you look at the 1860 census, there were 111 adult women living in Gold Hill and Virginia City in the outskirts. And if you really drill down into what those women were doing, I mean, prostitutes tend to lie. So, if you look at Mayflower and Blanche LeBeau, both of whom were living in a brothel in 1880 and were in their early 20s and were divorced, and saying that they made hats. They may not have been making hats. On the other hand, maybe they did make hats during the day, and maybe they made other things at night. But prostitutes often lied about what they were doing. And then there are the wonderfully colorful thing, the woman in 1870 who said she ran a hotel day refreshment, which I think is a very nice way to say it. But if you look at the ones in 1880, they're married, they're with children, they're saying they're teachers. They look like they're keeping house. And in 1880, a woman who arrived did not need to resort to sexual commerce, nor did she want to, because the men weren't bathing regularly. And you could sell them a loaf of bread or stitch their clothing and make a whole lot more money than resorting to sexual commerce. So the first women were not prostitutes. Now, just forget that, because it's a lot better if you answer that question in the future, that prostitutes were the first women. It's a lot more colorful. But the truth is, and on the Comstock we don't always respect the truth, but the truth is the first women were not prostitutes. But here he's feeding the Eastern audience what they want to hear, which is that the first women were prostitutes. And in fact, they were a solid number of women. And by the way, many of the first women in the 1860 census the ones who were obviously married with children, the highest percentage of women for any ethnic group were Mexican Americans, because this had shortly before been part of the Mexican Empire. They were right there. They were the first to arrive with their husbands. And so the Mexican Americans were the first women to arrive. Teamsters brought their wives because they had wagons and they could actually move their family. And then women just progressively made it to the Comstock. This is, by the way, a hat shop. but not that one. But not that one. This is one on C Street. You can still see this. In fact, if you go on South C Street on the uphill side, there are some really humble masonry structures. And if you walk across the street and look at them, you'll see that there are these masonry structures with the really old-looking wooden gables built on top of them, because it's easier for the bricklayers to lay bricks in straight lines than to try to achieve a gable, so they built the wood on top of it. And there are these wonderful tin awnings that have been cut out to look like they're canvas, and here you can see the reflection in the windows of those patterns. So that's your assignment for the day. Go on South C Street up and look and walk on the downhill side and look at the uphill side, and you'll see these businesses, including this bay window here. There are several of these structures that look just like this, and one of these was a millinery structure. They probably date to that earliest period of 1859 to 1861. Hard to date exactly when they were built, but they're very early, some of the earliest survivors from this period. And here's another depiction. I don't want to run out of time. How am I doing? Make sure I give you plenty of time. Here's another early depiction of the Comstock. This is Grafton Brown's second visit. Here is Richard Burton's, Sir Richard Burton, fresh from his discovery of the source of the Nile, not Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton. This is the earlier one. And he gives us one of our earliest depictions, again, very pastoral look, very primitive. And then Grafton Brown's Virginia City. This is a detail from it, a tightly packed place with churches, the Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, and the Methodist Church right here, with the big, just lots of structures. That's the important thing, and tightly packed, very cosmopolitan place. This thing is, his publication is available at Special Collections Library at University of Nevada, Reno. There are two versions. One of them has on the perimeter these great depictions of the mining technology. This is the Collar Mansion, which was uphill from Fourth Ward School, and then moved downhill. This enormous masonry structure moved downhill 4 blocks in 1871. Which was incredible that they were able to do this. And then this is a depiction of the Collar, the Gould and Curry mine from a mining perspective, available at the Keck Museum. And here are two other images from his 1864. This is the time of Samuel Clemens, when he found himself to be Mark Twain. Large structures, these 3-story and 4-story masonry structures. This is an important community, and this is only 4 years after its birth. And as Mark Twain wrote in Roughing It, and some talk of building a church, which it's hard to believe that Mark Twain lied to us, because his Virginia City would have many churches, and indeed here's the Episcopal Church that was already there. So I think Mark Twain may have been exaggerating. No. And so a place that transformed itself, and of course a writer, he didn't arrive on the Comstock looking like this. He looked like somebody else. I'll show you in a minute. Here is Grafton Brown's depiction of the Territorial Enterprise in 1860, and here is his depiction of the Territorial Enterprise building, which was where the Silver Queen was, in that area north of on North C Street, uphill side, and this was the Territorial Enterprise building just 4 years later. So that's the kind of progress that was being made up there. And of course, the opening of Thomas Maguire's Opera House, which was later purchased by John Piper. This one burned, but this was here is where the Episcopal Church was, that still is in that location. It burned also in the 1875 fire. And here is the enormous Opera House with a large entry and a large barn-like structure. That was on D Street, and it burned in the 1875 fire. And it included all the notables of the day. Julia Dean Hayne, who was the it girl, the America's sweetheart, soon to die of tuberculosis. Frank Mayo, who later invented the role of Davy Crockett, was an important character. You can see him right here, Frank Mayo. And Junius Brutus Booth, the elder brother of the Booth clan. Every Booth who didn't shoot a president came to the Comstock. The brothers who shot presidents had career changes, and so they didn't come here, but they would have. They would have, and probably wish they had. And then, of course, the big one, probably the biggest star of the day, Artemus Ward, arguably the first stand-up comic, although not really, but often people say he's the first stand-up comic in American history, who looks suspiciously like Mark Twain. Mark Twain didn't look like Mark Twain until Christmas of 1863 when he met Artemus Ward, and Artemus Ward said, "Oh, you gotta quit writing for newspapers," because that's how he started. Comic columns in newspapers don't sell, you get your salary, but everybody steals your work. So he started gathering together and publishing books. When he came out west, he was gathering material for his second book. His first book was called His Book. And Lincoln would read from it before his cabinet meetings to try to lighten the mood. He was Lincoln's favorite comic. In fact, the movie Lincoln has a homage to him, and it's a throwaway line where he says, "What's happening thus, and how shall we proceed thusly?" Well, that's a line from Artemus Ward, and it's just thrown in there. You don't even remember it. I'm sure you've seen the film. You don't remember it. Watch it again and wait for the line. It's Artemus Ward. He came west to gather material for his second book. He inspired Mark Twain to turn into Mark Twain in a lot of ways, and Mark Twain started looking just like him. And it was very nice of Artemus Ward to very quickly after meeting Mark Twain to die also of tuberculosis, because that left the stage open. And so for the first 10 years, Mark Twain started his lecture career in 1866. And for the first 10 years, people said, "Oh, you got to see him. He's just like Artemus Ward," to the point where apparently it was a bit irritating. So this is Virginia City before the railroad, heavily dependent on horses. The horses didn't disappear with the railroad, but you wouldn't necessarily come to the Comstock on a stagecoach. It still was a place of underground technology and remarkable advancement, but it was changed, obviously, because the railroad allowed for marginal ores to become viable ore bodies. Your backyard has gold in it. The difference between a viable ore body and a non-viable is partly technology. Can you extract the quarter ounce that's in your backyard, and also the value? If gold reaches $1 million an ounce, you're all going to dig up your backyard, even with today's technology. But if the technology improves and the value only goes up to $100,000 an ounce, you'll maybe be inspired to dig up your backyard. And then I'm going to give you a commercial, because after my retirement, I'm a failure. I'm a profound failure, I have to tell you, because I retired and then was immediately employed. I tried to retire and I failed. I'm now the executive director of the Comstock Foundation for History and Culture, and we are trying to save resources up there. You may recognize this poor derelict. The railroad tracks are right here in Gold Hill, and there's an ore chute that comes right down to the railroad, obviously, because it was designed to drop ore into the railroad. And you can see this poor thing, every single knee it has buckled terribly, and I'm not sure how this was being held up, except that it was either the supernatural or some other act of defiance of gravity. And this wire cable apparently somehow kept it all up too, and we are rebuilding it. This platform will go. This is a bat cage and designed for safety, so that the workers don't drop down into the shaft. The shaft is still there. some of the lower level workers, we probably could afford to lose, but the higher level. A bit much. So we gave them a platform, and it has room in case there are any bats. There've never been any bats observed, but they can fly out if they are there. And we are straightening these knees and reinforcing them. Some we did have to use some new timbers. This is not complete, but we hope that this hoisting work, which is a rare survivor on the Comstock because the mining technology has tended to fall away, we are hopeful that this will last another several decades so that I will never have to readdress it again, no matter how much of a miserable failure I am. We have just a few minutes. Do you have any questions about a topic that you did not want to hear about? Yes, please.
Is this where the fire was down? Where was the big Yellow Jacket fire? What, I know there were multiple
This is the
Yellow
upper,
Jacket.
yeah, good question. This is the upper Yellow Jacket hoist. It apparently dates to late 1930s.
Oh.
Or 1940 or something. So this shed behind it actually has an electric engine that was used to hoist. So it's late in the period, but nevertheless, I mean, we're getting up to the point where we can call that 100 years old. I hate
No.
to tell you. That may offend some of you, but it offends me, I know. So this is historic. The lower Yellow Jacket hoist is the one directly, well, it's within spitting distance of the Gold Hill Hotel.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
right up in their upper parking lot on the south
Right,
side.
that's the one you see.
And the lower Yellow Jacket hoist is in all likelihood the oldest surviving hoist on the Comstock. It's hard to verify that. They don't tell you their age. You know, they're like discreet women. They don't tell you their age, but it probably dates to the mid-1860s. So that, in all likelihood, was a hoisting work that witnessed the Yellow Jacket disaster of April of 1869,
Right.
when a fire started at the 800-foot level underground, and then as the morning shift was arriving, the timbers collapsed, the poisonous gas and smoke flooded into the neighboring Kentuck and Crown Point to the south, and claimed at least 35 casualties, maybe more, because not all the bodies were retrieved. The worst industrial accident measured by fatalities in Nevada history, period. The BMI explosion hurt more people, but didn't have anywhere near the fatalities.
Yeah, that's what I wasn't understanding, which one this was.
Yeah, this is Upper Yellow Jacket.
Because the Gold Hill Hotel has wonderful stories of ghosts in there, which to me means that I'm all the more anxious to stay there. And for our son, when he got married, they stayed at the modern part of the Gold Hill Hotel. They didn't want to have friends with them.
Right, and she's asking about the ghosts, and of course, yeah, there's a shack that's near the Upper Yellow Jacket, which they rent out. It's a very nice apartment, and it's reputed to be haunted, and they now offer, for $10 or $25, I'm not sure which, a ghost busting kit, which will measure EMT signals throughout the night, feed it into your computer, and you can take pictures, and you have gizmos, and they don't have a slime machine, but yes, it's well worth it. I highly recommend it. The hotel is wonderful, obviously, even in the rooms that aren't haunted.
Yeah, I know, it's a
Yes,
delightful
please.
place.
With all the early activity in Virginia City, why did the men examine the state capitol end up at Carson City?
The capital was, in part, you can say that it was, that Abraham Curry was a shrewd player when he platted out the capital, Carson City. He left open a huge amount of real estate and said that's where the capital would be. And this was several years before the Nevada Territory was even organized. So he did it in Utah Territory and said this will be a separate territory and state, and here's where the capital would go. So free land has always been an inducement to locating the capital. And they just, when Governor Nye arrived with his Treasury Secretary Orion Clemens, the older brother of Samuel Clemens, with his kid brother tagging along, hoping to get a job where he wouldn't have to work, that is, in the government. And it turned out there was no money. He ended up they just went like Carson City, and they never blinked an eye. There has always been, you know, for all the huffing and puffing you hear about moving the capital to Las Vegas, that will never happen. Because the Las Vegas legislators know what the Comstock legislators knew, which is that you do not want to craft laws in the presence of the majority of the population, because they will see what you're doing. Much better to do it in a remote location like Carson City. And once they started investing in it, there was just no looking behind. There really wasn't. Yeah.
Part of it was the access during the wintertime because of the more snow in Virginia City, that down here in the valley,
Yeah.
transportation was easier.
Yeah, he's saying that the access would have been difficult in Virginia City because of snow. Yeah, sort of. It was, they really, free land. Say free to a legislator, they'll jump at it every time. But, it's nice.
According to the Gold Hill News, the business people in Carson pledged to create the landscaping around the Capitol and make it beautiful. And 3 years later, it was a mudslide where people were grazing their cattle. And finally, they did get forced into doing it. But it seems like the people in Carson didn't like to spend their money the way the people in Virginia City did. It was a much more business.
Well, and where would you put it in Virginia City? I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, you know, it just wasn't the best place for it. And legislators do like to go away to do their work. They always have. There was some talking of moving into Eureka as